Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin at the top of the hour and will be recorded. And we invite you to connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we will be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, the campaign wants to connect with you on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Once again, welcome to today's webinar. Before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping details to go through with you. First, we'd love you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select everyone in the chat so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box, and we will dedicate the last 20 to 30 minutes to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. We do ask you to post your questions in the Q&A box instead of the chat. The webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed later this week or early next week to all who registered. We are streaming the webinar on Facebook Live. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants, and materials are accessible on GLR's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, aka CLIP. Please take 30 seconds to create an account if you haven't yet, so that you do not miss the bio slides and other materials from today's session. We will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during the Q&A later in the session, and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Also, before we start, I'd like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on November 23rd, knowing that it's a busy time with the Thanksgiving holiday, we will be reprising a session from October, co-sponsored with our partners at the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, and showing the video of that discussion titled Trauma-Informed Practices and the Construction of the Deep Reading Brain. The following week on November 30th, we are partnering with the Bezos Family Foundation to focus on what matters, COVID-19's lessons for American education. And then on December 9th, please join us again for a look at models for out-of-school time STEM that inspire young minds. We'll be sure to post a link in the chat box for more information and to register for next week's sessions, and then for upcoming sessions in December and even in January. And now we'd like to get our session started. Hello, everybody. We're so glad that you are here, and we thank you for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar titled Reconnecting to the Love of Learning to Accelerate Equitable Recovery. Today's exchange of ideas continues our series focused on recovery and equitable learning acceleration as we continue to respond to the pandemic's illumination and exacerbation of longstanding inequities in education. As part of this, we have also focused on solutions addressing the digital divide. We know that many online and hybrid content providers have worked to address inequities by making their resources accessible to low-income children and families, while ensuring there is support for those families to navigate and utilize their learning tools. Today, we have the privilege of learning about one of these outstanding content providers called Outschool.com that responded to the immense demand for learning resources by creating Outschool.org in the spring of 2020 to provide free curated content that best fits the needs of learners, while reconnecting them to the topics and ideas that interest them, thereby reconnecting them to the fun in learning and the love of learning. Today's conversation will lift up and explore how Outschool.org and its grantee partners, Campus Without Walls, two of them anyway, Campus Without Walls and the Oakland Reach, the conversation will explore how platforms like Outschool can be used in different ways to further academic and social emotional learning for students and families. And to begin our conversation today, I'm honored to welcome and introduce our moderator, Ki Vu. Ki is an experienced education executive with deep school systems and philanthropic experience. Before outschool.org with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he managed grants to improve teaching practice aligned to college and career-ready academic standards. He also taught algebra and calculus and served as special assistant to the superintendent for San Francisco Unified School District. So Ki, I'm very excited to turn it over to you to get our conversation started.
Thanks so much, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with you today and excited to have a conversation with our panelists to better understand how innovative out-of-school solutions like OutSchool can aid student progress, how nonprofits, schools, and school districts and families can engage with such platforms, and what's needed going forward to ensure that we provide flexible acceleration and support for students and families beyond these first couple of years post-pandemic. With that, I'm honored to welcome today's panelists in this work. And I'll briefly introduce each one of them, but just know that you can see more detailed bios linked in the chat. And I've also just provided my email in case any of you want to contact me in the chat. So our first panelist is Morgan Camus, Dr. Morgan Camus. She's a program lead for outschool.org and an equity-centered education leader with systems-level experience in nonprofit, government, and for-profit organizations. She served as a chief academic officer for a network of over 400 schools centered on global education and dual language immersion, where she led design and delivery of the organization's programmatic and human capital verticals. Next is Michael D'Souza. He's the chief program officer for the Oakland Reach. He's the youngest son of Azorean immigrants who settled in the Bay Area in 1961, and whose graduation from college was a dream realized for his family. He has served as a teacher, school leader, and educational researcher, and deeply understands the profound impact of quality education and the harm caused by systemic racism. And last but not least, Jasmine Toussaint is the director for Campus Without Walls. She has 15 years of experience in service, community engagement, and education. She has worked in the public and nonprofit sector, ensuring people of all ages and those in underserved communities thrive. Welcome to all of you. We're looking forward to engaging with and learning from each of you. Now, before I jump into the conversation with our panelists, I wanted to start by setting some context for the conversation and start with this quote. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. Oh, if you could go to the next slide. And share some data about the results that our public education system produces in the US. This data is important because it presents an important backdrop for our discussion. This first graph compares the US to other developed countries who are on the OECD on the PISA assessment in reading. Overall, the US is 21st out of 36 countries. In fact, as a whole, only 35% of our fourth graders read at or above grade level on the NAEP. That means almost 2/3 of them are not reading at grade level. And we know what happens to those students who aren't reading at grade level by fourth grade. They're 4 times less likely to finish high school, and approximately 85% of youth who come into contact with the juvenile system are considered to be functionally illiterate. In the US, 14% of the adult population, a staggering 32 million adults, cannot read, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics. As a whole, this data is pretty sobering, but it hides an even uglier truth. The national average you see masks the reality of 3 Americas. When you disaggregate by race, you see very different results for white Americans who are near the very top next to countries like Canada and Finland, when compared to Hispanic Latinx students and Black Americans. As you can see, the racial achievement gap in the US is comparable to the gap between the richest, or the top and the bottom OECD countries. The numbers in math are even worse. Now, you might make the assumption that Black and Hispanic Latinx students are more likely to be low income, thus explaining the gap. However, this next piece of data tracks students in ELA, or English Language Arts, as they progress through one urban school district from 3rd grade to 10th grade. I won't specify the district, but we'll say that it serves more than 200,000 students. As you look at the legend, please note that we are not comparing by just race alone, Black versus white. Rather, the orange bar actually represents non-low income Blacks, students who did not qualify for free and reduced price lunch, while the green bar represents low income white students, those who do qualify. If you start at the top and look at proficiency rates in 3rd grade, you can see that they are about even. But what do you begin to see as your eyes scan downward? That's right. By 5th grade, Black students have started to lose ground. And by 10th grade, they're almost 15% below their poor white peers and around 20% lower than where they started as 3rd graders. Let that soak in for a moment. We're not talking about poor Black children who start out behind and never catch up. You can only imagine what their assessment data looks like. For these students, they were at grade level proficiency in 3rd grade, and the longer they stayed in the system, the further behind they got. And that's the challenge in our education system. If you're poor, the system isn't designed to help you catch up. It's really only able to maintain the status quo. But if you're a Black student, regardless of your socioeconomic status, the impacts are even more damaging, where the longer you stay in the system, the further behind you get. Unfortunately, this school district's data is rather common and not just an exception. And I urge you, as you look at your own context, whether you see similar trends in your local school districts. Now, you might say, of course, these numbers are bad because the pandemic has had outsized negative impact on any number of educational outcomes for youth across this country. But this data is all from either 2015 or 2016 assessments or studies. Yes, COVID has exacerbated the challenge. However, when I look at this data, I think it's clear that our educational system has always left too many students behind, independent of COVID. And at the end of the day, we can't be satisfied with simply returning outcomes to pre-pandemic levels, because public education has always left too many learners behind. We have to drive towards solutions that have the potential to evolve or disrupt the system. And so that's what this conversation is about, as we look forward to recovering from the pandemic. And we see schools and districts going back to the way things were before. Is that enough for our students? Is the one-size-fits-all approach the best thing for students? Even as we've seen the diversity of students come forward through the pandemic. There are more students now who are staying virtual or moving away from the public school system altogether. And so how do we find solutions that meet a variety of needs? And with that as a backdrop, I want to bring our guests into the conversation. Morgan, Michael, and Jasmine, we've shared your professional profiles already, so I'd like to begin by asking you something more personal. Just share a little bit about yourself and what brings you to this work.
A great question, Key. I'm happy to go first. So I am an immigrant. I'm an English language learner, and I am almost over the traumatizing experience of first entering the US K-12 education system when I was 7. It all ended up working out fine, but my earliest memories were of being first, only, and other, because I was the Mandarin speaking student in my white suburban Florida school. So that feeling has been my North Star through all of my work as a teacher, as a school district leader, as a chief academic officer. And my work at outschool.org allows me to collaborate with those proximate leaders who are most close to and trusted by families who have these big, ambitious dreams and aspirations for their children.
Thanks, Morgan. Michael?
Yeah, unfortunately, if you all can give me access, I'll turn my video on, but right now it's not giving me permission. There we go. Fantastic. Hey all, this is Michael De Souza. I am the son of Jose Antonio and Giselle Paz, who are standing behind me and always with me, even when I'm not in a Zoom background. They're my parents. They were able to go to third grade in their home country in the Azores, and they had a dream. They had a dream that if they came to America, that their kids could have a different life than them. And I did. And in many ways, being able to go to college and become a teacher and eventually a principal, and now working at the Oak Reach. It was very clear to me that because I was the youngest in my family and I was able to speak English from kindergarten up, and because I inherited my mother's tone of skin, that there was so many privileges that I was given along my pathway to get to where I am. And so this work of giving families and parents and students, caregivers, the power to design their child's education and to design their path towards a life of joy and choice is something I've always cared about. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about how the Oak Reach has put families in positions of power and leadership in their child's education and within the education system. So thanks for having us. I appreciate you all.
I will go next. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jasmine Toussaint. I'm originally from New York City, the daughter of two Trinidadian immigrants. I'm first generation. I'm the first in my family to go to college, to go to grad school, and had a lot of opportunities when I was younger that shaped the way that I view education. I actually, so I went to New York City public schools all the way up into high school, and then got a scholarship to go to a boarding school in New Hampshire, where, as you can imagine, I didn't quite fit in. And so I transferred and went to a different school in New Jersey, a private school in New Jersey. And I saw firsthand the differences between the education that I got in New York City public schools and the education that I was getting in New Jersey and New Hampshire. And it really set me on a path to make sure that students had access to education, that they had access to resources that they didn't have, because too many of the people that I grew up with didn't have a chance to go to college. And so it became something that was really important to me. And that's a little bit about what brings me to the work.
Thanks so much for sharing a little bit about yourselves. Morgan, I'd like to start with you. Tell us a little bit about outschool.org. And as you reflect on the data I just shared, what's your reaction to it? And how is Outschool seeking to meet both the academic and social emotional needs of our most marginalized students and nurturing that love of learning?
Yeah, so I think the beginning of the story actually starts with the genesis of outschool.org. So it was originally conceived as an emergency response to COVID in March of 2020. So the platform was created a few years before to serve homeschooling families. And then overnight, because of the pandemic, all of America's school children became homeschoolers. And families and school systems, I'm sure many of you were on the front lines of that, were scrambling to serve these students in a consistent and high quality way with technology. So it was even more challenging than it would have normally been. So in the first month, outschool.org was pleased to be in a position to give away $300,000 to families who identified as low income, because we never ever want cost to be a barrier for families to access courses that nurture, as you mentioned, Key, the academic and social emotional learning needs of their children, particularly in such a disruptive and scary time. That first month, students signed up for nearly 30,000 classes that activated their love of learning. So that was either an elective, a music class, an enrichment class, a Spanish class, a foreign language class, or even just core academic content. Whatever those students and families needed to attune to whatever was going on for them to meet that moment was completely at their disposal and put them sort of in that driver's seat. So at outschool.org, we absolutely believe that you have to give children the power to make their own education decisions, that they know themselves best as learners. And it was our opportunity to be able to step into the moment in March of 2020 to lend what we had, which was a platform, a marketplace, some financial funds, so that all families, regardless of background, could have access to those courses.
That's great. Now, Michael, jump in. And so, I would imagine in Oakland, things were pretty tough as Oakland tried to adjust back in March and April of 2019. One of the things we've learned at our school this past year, even as we've worked through intermediaries, is just the idea that we have to continually directly engage with parents. And so as a parent advocacy organization, share a little bit about the Oakland Reach and how you were able to leverage OutSchool to help meet the needs of your families.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to be not too long-winded, but when COVID hit, the Oakland Reach had just finished a citywide campaign around literacy outcomes. And we had started building a coalition with charter schools in the district and the mayor's office, the NAACP, preschool programs, after school programs. And we were like, hey, this literacy issue is something that's keeping our families awake and we have to do something about it. And so we got a policy passed at the city level to make sure that all children had access to systematic literacy instruction. And we're about to launch a big summit with like teachers and principals from across the city to start having a conversation about how we were going to close the opportunity gap for literacy learning. And COVID hit. And we immediately went into just raising funds to make sure that families could pay rent and put foods in their fridge. And so what we did during that time when we were engaging with families and just learning about their challenges was how much they are still worried about their child's reading and how much they were really concerned with the quality of distance learning they were receiving from their districts. And so Lakeisha Young, our founder and our CEO now, back then she was executive director, she said, Michael, I think we have to build something. I think we have to build something so that families can come to a place where they feel supported and seen and that their children can get access to high quality programming. And so we built what we call the virtual hub, which was a way for families to get access to just really high quality, we call it the porterhouse steak of academic and social enrichments for their children. And so OutSchool was a really important piece of that puzzle. But we also hired our own literacy teachers and we hired our own teachers and we hired, we worked with local partners like Fromm's Martial Arts, which is a Black-led martial arts dojo here in Oakland. We partnered with the Black Literary Collective, which is a group of amazing authors from Oakland that teach kids how to think creatively and write stories and poetry. And we made an important partnership with Reconstruction.org, which is a Black-centered curriculum project. And so we've loved the work we've done, but we loved it because it actually isn't different than what we were doing before. We were fighting for policy changes. And what the pandemic did was made us realize that we can't just ask for things anymore. We actually have to create them. And a powerful way to move the work and to move the system is to recognize that parents need it now and we can't wait. So we often say the time is over, the wait is over, the time is now. And so that's how we positioned ourselves when COVID hit. And I'm pretty sure I'm probably not answering the question all the way. Did I miss anything, Keith?
No, you're good. Thanks for that. So Jasmine, before I jump to you, go back to Morgan. Morgan, you worked closely with Oakland Reach and other grantees during our first set of community partner grants to school districts, after school programs like Boys and Girls Club and nonprofit organizations. What were some of the biggest takeaways or lessons learned from that first set of grants?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So that first set of grants, there were a set of schools that just got cash grants, and then Michael and Jasmine were part of our community partner grants, and they were selected based on sort of these three tenets. They were clearly equity warriors in everything that they spoke of and walked and led in their organizations. They understood sort of more holistic and important measures of what it meant to be a successful student in the 21st century. So it wasn't just, test scores. It was really thinking about the social emotional wellness, the creativity, the confidence, the curiosity, those skills that are so important to this generation of learners, and like what that looks like in practice as teaching and learning happens in this new sort of COVID world. And that they all wanted their things to make sense, right? So Michael in his chat dropped the family hub, like there was a point of view around how one is aggregating all of these learning experiences, of which OutSchool is one of those tools, but that it all needs to feel like it's coherent, that it feels like they have something in common, that there are some very clear design elements and theories of learning that are woven through all of the different programmatic options that our community community partners stood up in response to what the students and their families were saying. So I think across that broad swath, and I'll give you some numbers as to like how much of an investment we made in these community partners in just a second. But I think, you know, what we saw was that we got some things right and we got a lot of things not so right. So the first thing that I will say is that what we did learn is that we correctly estimated the flexibility of the marketplace itself, right? So the OutSchool platform is a marketplace, and each of our community partners, and Jasmine and Mike will speak about it separately, they used OutSchool classes to serve different student populations for different purposes. And so it was just really cool to see how our Lego blocks of OutSchool classes fit within their broader designs and their broader programmatic goals. I think we underestimated the very real challenge of integrating a non-traditional teaching and learning tool within a very traditional like K-12 ecosystem. So, you know, OutSchool in 2015 was created for families who were right next to the learner, right? And so it was a parent who created an account, they were self-paying, the credit card was there, and they just shifted that laptop right next to their child who was ready to take that OutSchool class. It looks really different when parent and kid are decoupled and the child is in the custodial care of somebody at their school site or at their after school site. And so, you know, Jasmine and Michael were some of our best thought partners in thinking through what sort of an enterprise solution could look like as we're partnering with schools and districts and community organizations. And then I would say like the last lesson or like aha moment we had about halfway through is that I think at OutSchool, we wholeheartedly, like to our core, believe in putting students in the driver's seat of learning, right? The primacy of student voice and choice is held high, proudly held high. And it's reflected in many of the design elements of how OutSchool as a platform operates. And kids need routine. They need consistency. They need to know where they're supposed to be in any given moment. And so I think as we started thinking about what it meant to have OutSchool as a learning experience, is we wanted to hold, you know, the online community. It had to be high trust. It had to be relational. And then there also had to be a cadence that felt predictable enough so that the kids could be successful. So there could be momentum that was built as they were taking courses along a certain pathway or along a certain elective. And so the clustering of courses, the organization of the different Lego OutSchool blocks really mattered. And so that's something I see Jasmine nodding. That's something that we did better as we launched into this fall semester that she can share more about, is that instead of letting kids have unfettered access to 100,000 courses, which even for me is hard when I have all of those choices on Netflix. Like sometimes the recommendation engine and the thoughtfulness of the grownups in these children's lives about how to organize and prioritize the content really came in handy. And so that I think was another key lesson that we learned as we sort of rolled this out to our first group of partners.
Thanks, Morgan. Jasmine, let's bring you in. So what is Campus Without Walls, and how have you partnered with districts like Boston Public Schools and other community partners to expand opportunities for youth? And you know, listening to Morgan, some of the lessons learned, what have been some of your big takeaways from your work with OutSchool?
Sure. I'll take you through a few slides just to give you an overview of Campus Without Walls and then how we've partnered with OutSchool and BPS. So next slide. So we all know that there was a demand for change at this moment. I think if COVID taught us anything, is that it only highlighted some of the racial inequities in K-12 education. Sorry, next slide. And so what Campus Without Walls did, we actually went to over 150 school leaders, teachers, and students, and we asked them what they wanted. And these are the things that they said that they wanted. They wanted more culturally engaging content. They wanted AP advanced coursework. They wanted ethnic studies. They wanted increased teacher diversity, anywhere, anytime learning. And so you see the full list there. And so in response, sorry, next slide. Campus Without Walls is born. And so what it is an educational framework that leverages the power of public schools and technology to create greater equity, access, and opportunity for all students. And so it's across sector collaboration of nonprofits, universities, employers, so like Boston Public Schools, like outschool.org, that all believe that school assignments shouldn't limit a student's educational opportunity. Next slide. And so this is what Campus Without Walls actually looks like in the future. So meet Tamika. We have partner schools. So right now we have about 17 partner schools, and students take all of their core subjects at their school. But through a learning management system in the spring, that was outschool.org and Campus Without Walls, they have an opportunity to take classes anywhere. So they can take an AP history course at Fenway High School, or they could take Black Studies at Outschool, or they could do an affinity group, a Haitian affinity group, or a wellness break with one of our partners that focuses on mental health, or a coding internship or with a different partner that focuses on career readiness, or even dance practice. And so that's the future of Campus Without Walls. And the next slide, I'll talk about our current iteration and what that looks like right now. And so right now it's split between academic courses and enrichment modules. And so with our academic courses, we've hired 17 academic teachers who are teaching math, English, science, history, world languages, et cetera. And we've asked them to open up their classroom for a thematic unit. And so teachers, partner teachers, bring their students, and they can take these classes either synchronously or asynchronously. And where Outschool came in is that we also had enrichment modules taught by 13 different community-based organizations that had everything from career readiness, college readiness, financial literacy, all of that. And we use the funds from Outschool to create learning pods. And so these community-based organizations actually partnered with partner teachers and taught classes. Additionally, we offered credits to students who wanted to take classes. So we offered the full library of Outschool's classes to those students to sign up and take as many courses as they wanted. But as Morgan mentioned, it might have been a little bit much for students just because it's just too many choices. And so we pivoted for the fall. And I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I need access to share my screen to show you what that looks like. 1 second. All right. Okay, are you able to see my screen? So for the fall course catalog, as I mentioned, we split the classes into academic courses, and so that remained the same. We still had a variety of courses taught by the instructors that we hired. But then for our enrichment modules, as I mentioned, these were all sponsored by Outschool. We had, for example, Journey to Your Authentic Self, which was focused on mental health, and that was taught by the Bethel Institute. And then we had Steps to Success, which is career readiness, and that's taught by Boston PIC. But what we did with Outschool is that instead of just offering like a wide variety of different courses, we pre-selected 3 classes that we knew students would be interested in. So for example, that was The Great Debate, What's Your Point? Common Sense, which is a financial literacy course, and then College Essays, Getting on the Right Track. And so we actually had 7 teachers and serving approximately 75 plus students taking these courses. And this model worked well for us, actually pre-selecting courses and offering them as a model for students to take. And so that's been really successful. And that's what we've been up to with Outschool.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. Just following up quickly, I think Campus Without Walls and Boston Public Schools during the pandemic really tried to break down the traditional kind of silos and walls of school. But what I see in a lot of schools and districts is once folks returned in person, like those walls went right back up. And so how have you been able to kind of maintain kind of that new normal where you're not letting the walls of a school dictate the learning experience for kids?
Yeah, I actually think the pandemic helped Campus Without Walls by showing schools that it's possible for students to do a combination of remote learning and in-person learning. And so now that we've been back in the schools, we've actually put Polycom cameras in each classroom. And so we're connecting classroom to classroom, and it works. And we have schools that are invested and interested because we did it in the spring, and they saw that, okay, students were engaged, students were interested. This is something that students wanted. And so when we continued in the fall, that actually did help us, like not going back to normal or the way that things have always been. And so it's actually been helpful to have students in person because it's easier to connect them now.
Now, Michael, jumping to you, asking somewhat of a similar question. I think your context is different in that you work directly with families, but talk a little bit about the diversity of needs that your families have and how you're tailoring services to meet, often very different needs across your population.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that makes the hub different than the traditional school system is that the traditional school system kind of atomizes a student as an individual unit of interaction, and they decontextualize them from their family and their community, right? And so I think what the hub has done is seeing that, and we're pushing our partners, right, and pushing even the school district, like we actually have to see the student as a whole, right? And their whole includes their family and the community they live in, right? So when you're asking about like the diversity, like we have families, we're 50% of Black families, 50% Latino. Just recently, this last few months, we have an increase of Arabic speaking families, many Yemeni families, some Vietnamese speaking families, because we just entered into a partnership with the district to be their core partner to support families who are enrolled in their distance learning program. So we pretty much serve mostly Black and brown families, but excited to connect with some of these new families. But the diversity of needs are huge. And so what we've always held this tension between what we call feeding and fishing. So a family during COVID, like I said, we were trying to just get them money to pay for rent and get food, but we also stopped thinking about just helping them get through the moment, but actually thinking about how that they can come out of this stronger, right? So we launched tech support for all families that they are able to learn how to use technology, not just for educational transactions, but to change the way that they think about what's possible for themselves in their own careers and their children's life, right? So we just launched a tech fellowship where families are in the tech fellowship where they're getting a stipend, but they're gonna learn how to use technology to transform their families. We're in the planning process of running a fellowship for cryptocurrency and NFTs for families in the new year. We had families go through a fellowship around literacy so that their children, so they can learn how to become literacy teachers for their children, for children in the community, and potentially become literacy teachers in our schools. We had a fellowship for families to become special advocacy advocates. So we really don't just try to get families through this moment. We try to get them to get this moment, but also change what they think is possible. I think so often Black and brown families, immigrant families are taught to how to navigate a system and to just take for granted that the systems and the power regime that exists now is just how it will be. And we have to just teach people to have grit and resilience to fight through it. And we're saying, actually, no, you need to go in the system and find ways to push apart the obstacles so that you are actually an agent of change. And at the very least for your child, right? That you are designing your child's education, you are demanding great things for your child, whether it's in your brick and mortar school or whether it's in the hub where you have access to these huge array of courses. So, I mean, the needs and the assets of our families is so diverse, all the way from families who've decided to we help them get into education classes for themselves to get their own bachelor's degrees, or to learn English, or to do an entrepreneurship fellowship that we partnered with in the fall. And then we have families who, some of them already have college degrees and they just want to make sure their kids are getting that additional like martial arts class because they got out of shape with all that Zoom class, right? So the families we serve are super diverse and their needs and assets are very diverse. And it's been just a pleasure to be in relationship with them. The last thing I'll say is that's important is the hub is pretty complex. There's a lot of pieces. But the special sauce of our hub is that every family has an educational case manager, right? So there's one person who gets to know your family as a whole, like they get to know what your aspirations are, what your needs are. When we find new resources for you, we're plugging you into these resources, right? So I think that any system that we're trying to bring families who have been historically marginalized and silenced and moved away from positions of power and opportunity, that we have people who are helping them get closer to opportunity and closer to resources. Because I think with like the OutSchool platform, we learned so much about like just being able to set up a Zoom meeting with that one family, with their family liaison, and let's look at OutSchool together, right? Let's make some choices together. Let's look at your calendar at the same time, right? So all these skills that that I know that my mom and dad would never been able to like use a Google Calendar, go to OutSchool, schedule my time, figure out how all the pieces fit together. But if my mom had someone that could help her learn how to use calendars and learn how to use the website, that she might be able to get closer to that opportunity that she normally would have never had. So the special sauce is our family liaisons and the work they do with families.
Yeah, there was a question from Stephen Walvig in the chat or in the Q&A about this, and I want to bring Morgan and Jasmine into this around like what mentoring coaching is available for families or for students to kind of navigate all of the the choice that they have that they've never necessarily been given before, and how have you worked to provide some of those supports? Go ahead, Jasmine.
Sure. Well, our model is an in-school model, and so the support is provided directly by the teacher, but we've also partnered with universities to provide pre-practicum and full practicum support. So every classroom has a volunteer that's supporting that, and the lead teacher and the partner teacher also supporting in the classroom. And so it's a little different just because it's an in-school model.
I would say looking broadly across our grantees, in addition to the support that Jasmine and Michael talked about, we have also grantees that have AmeriCorps volunteers. So they're like properly in this like after school space, and they have these sort of near peer role model, hands-on support for these students in both the classroom that transition into after school. And so we've been working with a few of our grantees in Queens and in California who have this after school support. And so it's been on us at OutSchool to work through the capacity building and the training of those site directors, who then in turn sort of turn around and support those families and those kids. I think it's gone better now than it did in the beginning, because I think, again, when you're trying to come into a very traditional education space, folks in that system sort of are learned and trained a certain way, right? And so I think what we had to take away from OutSchool is that just telling them on Zoom and saying like, here's the URL, like go and do, like that's not enough. And it's certainly not enough for the families that are vulnerable and underserved and may not speak English as a first language, or may not have ever done something like this where they have so much broad access to electives. And so I think we needed to have the humility and the self-awareness to say like, okay, we need to scaffold an appropriate amount of information that is meeting our stakeholders on the ground where they are, so that they can be as successful as possible in helping us implement the program.
So Jasmine and Michael, so you worked with us in the midst of the pandemic. I think as we emerged in the spring, and now that most schools are back in person through the fall, like what worked then that you've continued and are going to be fighting tooth and nail to make sure it continues? What are some of the missed opportunities that you think maybe you would have done it differently had you known now what you knew then? Feel free to jump in, either of you.
Sure, I can go first. I think that one of the missed opportunities is that I mentioned when we were going through the slides, is that we offered students like full range to OutSchool courses. We said, like, here's the full catalog, take as many classes as you want. And we had a lot of students sign up, and then I think Zoom fatigue set in, and then they kind of, faltered. And so one of the things that has really worked for us this fall is actually selecting courses that students said that they were interested in. So if students said that a lot of students were interested in financial literacy. And so we are now offering that course, and classes are signing up for it. And we found that was a better model. But I think, capitalizing on that earlier would have been great, like just having more OutSchool classes in our course catalog in the spring. But I think we learned from that, and we switched in the fall. And so that was something that was really helpful for us.
Michael?
Yeah, I think that it's hard for me to like look back and like, because I feel like it's like all the same path. That's why I was like hesitating. But the families that we want to serve are the families who may not have like some of the social and cultural capital to navigate the online world, right? And so like the work we've done to like do the tech workshops and do the tech fellowship and to like really like see families gaining access to power that they historically have been denied. All like we're trying to do that, but we're also like, well, how can we make our systems less white supremacist, like less like exclusive, right? So like we're really thinking of, as we move forward, how do the systems meet families with like the systems that they are most comfortable with? So like really want to move forward with like using text-based systems as much as possible. Most of our families, we could coach them on how to use email, but it's just like at some point we just be like, well, that's just not the system they're using, right? And so really we're thinking about how the phone and text can be the main way that families interact with our hub, how they're getting text notifications. Like most families are using text a lot. So I know it's a very technical thing, but like we pushed hard to help families navigate the systems that exist. And now we're going to start pushing our systems to make sure they're meeting them with the way that they feel most comfortable. Because what we found was that when we massively made some of our programming available to families that didn't yet have a family liaison, right, that didn't have that relationship, that their uptake to the actual coming to classes and to coming to our workshops and all that was way less, which we knew. Like we knew that the special sauce has always been our family liaison, but we wondered if we could ramp up the speed of that relationship building if the tools we used were more familiar to them, right? Where like if they were getting the reminder, hey, we're so excited to see you tonight at tonight's Family Sustainability Center, right? Our bi-weekly workshops. That if those things were like more automated, but also still very human, I think we could have grown even faster. And so as we look forward to like continue to scale our work, both within the city and potentially across the country and other cities that are interested in having these like family-centered, like liberated spaces for learning, we're really thinking about how to make sure that the systems that we use are meeting families with the systems and the ways of communicating that are most comfortable for them.
Now, I want to go back to just a comment that Morgan made earlier in terms when she started her comments around the idea of coherence. I think one of the things I've observed is one, that the job of schooling is as difficult as it was, difficult as it was before the pandemic got even worse with the pandemic. And so it's this idea that schools can't do it alone. And so it requires cross-sector collaboration to really help students thrive. The challenge as you bring in more partners is the idea of coherence. And Morgan talked about how important coherence is in terms of helping things make sense for students and their families. Talk a little bit about the role of organizations outside of school systems who partner with school systems in helping it all make sense for families, but also pushing on the school system to be more coherent in its approach.
I can start this time, if that's helpful. I feel like what is massively missing from many school systems that struggle to serve families is a clear sense of purpose. Like, why does this school exist? Why do the students show up every day? Why do the teachers show up? I think we have the historical memory of why schools exist, but the historical memory of schools has been very harmful to our families, right? So I think if schools are starting to say like school exists so that families can feel more powerful, so that students can develop a sense of purpose, right? If schools exist for a reason, then you have to start shifting the way that you structure it, right? And I think once again, this idea of atomization, of atomizing the student as an individual unit, atomizing courses as individual courses, right? Not even engaging with the family at all, right? I think we need schools to really recognize that like we should be kind of starting afresh, right? The public school system has never served Black and brown families, right? I mean, there's so many stories of like, I mean, just this last year has been so so heartbreaking to see like how many of the boarding schools in America and in Canada, and how many dead Indigenous bodies are buried next to schools, right? If we look back around what Brown versus Board did to Black educators and Black principals, and how many of them never got jobs back in the education system, right? Like the way that school has functioned has never been about liberation, has never been about changing power. It's always been about reproducing power. So for me, I think that school should just be really thinking, how do we coherently build a system that's about liberation and power? How do we use models from the past that have shown us that it's possible to make families and students feel powerful and for them to change their lives? I love the work of Dr. Goldie Mohammed and the work she's writing around Black literary societies and the history around how schools work could be about liberation and about loving yourself and critical knowledge that allows you to change your trajectory, right? So for me, I just don't think there's been coherence when I go to the average school around why do we even exist beyond like teaching classes, right? Beyond like kids sitting in seats, beyond collecting ADA to make sure that the money comes in and we can pay people's salaries. We need to ask the deep question of like, why school? Like, why education? What is the purpose, right? And I think being a child of immigrants, like that sense of purpose was always in every day of my life. Like my mom came here, my dad came here to sacrifice and to work so their kids could have more, right? It was to disrupt generations of poverty, right? And I think if that's not clear, then we're never going to be coherent, right? And I think for our families, when we've worked with them, okay, so what are your goals? Like, what do you want to be true? What do you want to be true by the end of this year? What do you want to be true by the time your baby graduates high school? There's a coherence in individual families building goals and then finding ways to plug in resources and opportunities to meet their goals. But I don't see that a lot of school systems are thinking that transformationally about like why the school even exists. And I think that's the first step.
Thanks for that. Jasmine?
So I think in terms of one of the tenets of Campus Without Walls is just like the whole community as educators. And so what's been really helpful for us is having organizations like OutSchool or PIC or HERC or Sociedad Latina, all of these different organizations coming together to teach in the schools. And so I think that that's helped increase the value that the schools have seen in these programs because they're like literally coming into the classroom and teaching courses, and the students are engaged, the students are excited. We actually have more students signing up for the enrichment modules than the actual academic courses. And so I think that that's something that has proved really valuable to schools. And I think that our model, the model of Campus Without Walls is helping schools to see the importance of the whole community as educators.
Morgan, would love to hear you jump in as an educator and just talk about, like, I think this idea of coherence, but also, and I'm a big fan of standards-based instruction. And so, but you know, I think as we think about, you know, school systems, we often get so narrow in what we think of as learning that we kind of get lost, you know, in the standards. And so talk about, like, how do we build coherence, but within that context.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to be able to do this, but I'm going to merge Michael and Jasmine's point. And I think what they had in common, if I could like repeat what they said, is that they've just found a way to lower the walls of that cylinder block classroom. Right. And I think what happened during the pandemic is that every living room in America, every office building, every car, every parking lot, like wherever these kids were logging in with their devices into schools, now parents had a front view seat. Now grandparents had a front view seat. Now, you know, the guardian, the basketball coach who's down the street, the neighbor who runs the after school program at the neighborhood park now has a front row seat. And I think what's happened in education is that we have been so protective about what happens in this magical black box of school. And then overnight, like everything got shattered in terms of time and space because we were all sort of in this virtual world together. And I think by making it open, by lowering those boundaries, what has happened is that we have given agency and power to the people who are sending their best, their most precious, their most perfect child into the system. And they're just saying, like, you have harmed my child in the past. This is not sufficient. This is not good enough. Like, you don't even know the wholeness and the specialness and the magic of my child because you were putting them in these like very concrete cylinder blocks. And when Michael said, like, families build plans for their children, like, oh my gosh, don't they? And when parents are able to see how the school either wants to even get to know those plans or has systems to, you know, lean in with curiosity about those plans, if like those don't exist, then you're sort of like looking at this institution as, well, what is it doing to benefit my family? What is it doing to benefit my most precious, most perfect child that I'm sending to you in a compulsory way, because I have to, every single day for the next 10 years, right? And so I think we just need to like hold on to the idea that like so much visibility has been given to families and to other stakeholders who aren't in these like positional places of the education system. And I hope that never goes away. And I hope we never forget. And I hope that we like continue to not, you know, clam up again in our turtle shells at school and just say like, nope, 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 we're going to go back to these perfect walls. We're going to go back to the teacher in the front. We're going to go back to the closed door. And so I think that is a huge invitation that I really want to just reiterate what I heard Jasmine and Michael say. And then to your point, Key, I mean, I think, yes, standards-based instruction, there is a science to reading, right? There are best practices that we know from both, you know, expert practitioners and researchers about like how students learn best, and that needs to be designed with an equity-centered frame. And so I think it's like taking the ones and zeros of the scope and sequence of whatever, you know, a fourth grader is supposed to learn, and doing it in ways, and I think OutSchool is so good at this, right? Because so many of our classes are standards aligned. So many of our classes align with, you know, all of the national recognized exams, whether it's, you know, the NWA or the MAP test, like a lot of our classes are, and what our teachers bring to it is a creative lens to how to teach that standard in a way that feels timely, relevant, culturally responsive to that child. And so I think what we have not given teachers enough agency and creativity to take those standards-based best practices, right? The things that we know are true and real and good for kids, and allowing the wholeness, the goal setting, the totality, the humanity of kids and their families to inform how the what is taught.
So I think that's a great segue to share a grant opportunity that outschool.org has launched to partner with school districts, schools, nonprofit organizations. We're also looking for homeschool networks serving predominantly Black, Hispanic, Latinx, and Indigenous families, as well as low-income families. And so if we could go back to the slides. So we are launching a new set of community partner grants. And after we share this information, would love to jump back to Michael and Jasmine to just share their perspective or some of the lessons learned as they have partnered with us around things to look for, you know, things to avoid, speed bumps to avoid. But we are, as I said, looking for public school districts and individual schools, whether traditional or charter, nonprofit organizations like Boys and Girls Club, Oakland Reach, homeschool networks serving greater than 75% students of color, Black, Hispanic, Latinx, or Indigenous, or greater than 75% low-income students, with grants up to $75,000 in OutSchool classes to improve learning outcomes, provide enrichment opportunities, and strengthen a love of learning. This is not designed to take you to scale. This is not a grant for a school district to say, hey, let's do this for every school. This is about really working with us to design an approach that works for your context. And let's test it out in 2 or 3 schools or 2 or 3 learning centers and see if we can have success in meeting the needs of kids, and then we can think about going to scale. You have about a month, so the deadline is December 17th to apply. If you need more time, you can always let us know kind of what your extenuating circumstances are. But the grants are really designed to be aligned to 3 strategic priorities, and we can move to the next slide. And I think it speaks to some of the topics that we've already talked about. Michael, you talked about just there being a coherent instructional vision around how you want to use these resources and what the impact you're trying to have in order to move the needle. And the second is just around more structured programming. I think kind of in the initial set of grants, we had kids taking, a class here, a class there, across a number of different topics. And it was really difficult to figure out kind of what impact that was having beyond them, learning a few things here and there. And so we have the ability to have a 10-week set of classes focused on helping students learn to read, learn to code, learn algebra or master their fractions. And so what are some bite-sized impact? What's some bite-sized impact you want to have? And how does OutSchool fit into kind of this broader system of supports that you have in order to meet those outcomes? And then, as I mentioned, that the third strategic priority is just building a strong ecosystem of supports. And I'll give you some examples where of existing grants. We had a grant to Charleston County School District where we provided a month-long math enrichment in grades 2 through 5, where OutSchool teachers used the Zern math platform, which is a high quality math program that's aligned to the standards. And we were trying to help Charleston students really address unfinished learning over the summer before they went back to school in person in the fall. And so trying to build kind of this ecosystem of supports. Hands-in Learning Co-op was a homeschooling network that wanted to, in addition to the kind of the academic focus classes that they were already providing their students, they wanted to provide identity affirming content for their Black families. Unreasonable Kids was a nonprofit organization in Virginia Beach, working with Virginia Beach Public Schools in a couple of their highest needs elementary schools to provide a couple of hours of small group tutoring to their neediest students. And then you've heard a lot about Oakland Reach. And so I will, let's see, I'm hoping somebody has put a link in the chat with the link to our landing page where you can learn more. But Michael and Jasmine, bringing you back in, and Morgan too, as you think about this opportunity for prospective applicants, like what pieces of advice would you provide to folks as they're thinking about applying for this grant?
Let me think. I think that the tension with the conversation I've had with Morgan and Key over the years has been it's the beautiful idea of like an open marketplace, and there's so many choices. And I know Morgan, you've been talking about like how do we curate things and like make the decisions not quite as taxing on families and students. But I think that this ultimately like open marketplaces, I think historically we've thought that was going to get us to a better place. And I think the more we realize that open marketplaces ultimately serve people with the most privilege and power first, and then you got to do extra work or change the system to get families who are furthest from opportunity and closest to paying to use them. So I think as you think about applying to get this access to these amazing resources, is how do we create an anti-racist system that doesn't privilege the privileged, right? That you're actually building systems so that the families who are furthest from opportunity, right, and closest to pain are the ones who are most likely to use the resources. And I would say we haven't figured that out yet, right? Like we are still figuring that out. My reflection around how to like move towards a text-based system, towards like systems where the phone is really like the core of the way we're going to interact with families. Those are some of the things that I think of, but it's also like language. Like what languages are you going to support families in using? Like how are we teaching families to translate the website, or does OutSchool already have some translation? Like, there's all these barriers that are put in place that we should be thinking about as organizations, so that we're not just creating a system that continues to privilege the privilege, right? And I think that's what's complex.
Yeah. So to Michael's point, there are so many resources, and I think one thing that has proved helpful for us is just like narrowing down what students want to learn more about, and then introducing things that they might not know enough about. So giving students those options and then letting them choose. I think that that's something that is helpful, and that it would go a long way. So for us, like just like listing, okay, well here, what are you interested in? And then using that to say, well, here's a list of all of the OutSchool courses that would fit with that, is a good model. And I think that it helps students gain access to courses that they wouldn't have maybe thought about before.
I think that both those things are true. So I appreciate Jasmine and Michael, saying that. Another thing that I think we learned as we were trying to support all of our grantees is just there needs to be more than one person who applies for the grant that wants to do this, right? There needs to be some level of like socialization and capacity building and planning. And I think, Key said rightly, $75,000 seems like a lot, but it's not going to be enough to transform every child across an entire sort of network of schools. And so where does it fit? What is the specific problem, if you're coming from a school or a district or community organization, that you're trying to solve for? And I've heard all sorts of ideas, and Key, there's some questions in the Q&A that we can answer that folks have, but I've had people who want to tackle the substitute teacher crisis. I've had people that want to tackle CTE education. I've had people that want to tackle foreign language and giving access to Native and heritage speakers. Like, you have to sort of really do a needs assessment of what your organization really wants to strive and do, and not have this sort of OutSchool pilot or project or opportunity sort of sit outside of the things that are already baked into your strategic priorities, your next 5-year plan, like whatever is sort of your gold star or North Star in your organization. Like, take a look at that and then see, because OutSchool is infinitely flexible, probably too flexible. And so it's going to behoove our future partners to like do that rigorous, like intentional planning and thinking as to what is the barrier that is preventing you from unlocking success and access and all the things that you care about. Because it's not hard for us to spitball and brainstorm the ways that OutSchool could help you with that issue. But I think being very specific and rooted in the problem that you're trying to solve will allow this partnership to just blossom and thrive in sort of like more sustainable ways.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, and in response to, there was a question from Lisa about, do kids involved access classes during brick and mortar school, or at home, or after school, or weekends? And the answer is yes. It's the beauty of technology, right? Like, if kids are already in school, 7 to 2, but they have after school time, and you're looking for content that supplements what they're already getting, you can do that. You could be a homeschool co-op where you need, you don't have the teachers who can teach physics, specific content in physics, so you could fill a gap there during school. You could be a school district who, through a tiered intervention system, might not have the necessary supports in-house. Then you could use OutSchool to provide some targeted assistance for students, or after school where they're getting targeted small group tutoring. And so these are all the things that are possible. And so I think, to Morgan's point, just being clear around what you're trying to achieve, and is what you're trying to achieve, I think, manageable enough to think that a solution like OutSchool could help you to achieve it. Like, if you think OutSchool is going to solve all your problems, then this is not, I think, the right opportunity. I think this is about, figuring out where does OutSchool fit within your context in order to help you achieve your goals and what you're already doing, rather than solving all your problems.
Can I add, because you said something that like triggered something that I haven't talked enough about, Key, is that everything that we've tried to do in the hub has been about getting great things to families, but it has also been an advocacy push, right? So listening to you talk, reminding me like, we actually should be demanding the system to free our kids from the systems that prevent them from being able to do things like OutSchool during their day, right? The current structure doesn't allow for a kid to be like, actually, I'm not going to that class with 30 kids and one teacher. I'm actually going to do this other thing that I'm so excited about and is aligned to my family's goals and vision for my future, right? But our system has like put us in boxes and like 30 kids, one box, credential teacher, right? Some of the bureaucracy of the education system actually prevents us from doing cool things like OutSchool, right? The idea that we have to push OutSchool to after school or to these other places is really problematic, right? Because the system presumes that it knows what's best for kids, right? And then it builds policies with a presumption that they know what's best for families, and maybe they even know better than what families know about their children, right? So I think all of us in our different organizations should be fighting and advocating for things to be freed so their children can get the things that they know is best for their child. And so as we move our work with the hub forward, we're constantly thinking about, okay, we're building this, but we have to advocate for this so that we don't have to keep on going around these barriers, right? And right now, we all know this, like there's a whole title, it's called The Great Resignation, right? Like there are not enough credentialed teachers in this country. Seattle just closed the entire district last Friday because weren't enough teachers available. Did you all know that? Like we have to be building systems that can stand up amongst the instability of the average urban school system, because our children will be harmed if we're waiting for it to get more stable. We can't wait, right? Like the children that we're serving, the children that I'm fighting for, if they don't learn how to read by third grade, their life outcomes are going to be really, really problematic, right? So we have to be building up systems, and we have to recognize when the barriers are put in place that doesn't allow for a child to get access to high quality programming because the system isn't so unstable, right? So yes, get OutSchool, but then make sure you're having the conversations with the power brokers that deny your children access to these types of programs during their core day, because that's just like, it doesn't serve them, right? It serves the system really well, but it doesn't serve our children.
I know we've started to answer some of the Q&A already, but I urge you, if you have other questions, please ask it in the Q&A. So we'll start with Q&A and hear from hear responses from our panelists. So I think the first one's already done. Morgan, Lisa talked about like what size of community or hub are we thinking about, and so any thoughts on that? We've talked about kind of some of the minimum requirements, but any pieces of advice?
We hate artificial constraints at OutSchool. We're always going to like keep it pretty wide open. I would say that we have seen the most amount of success across like 2 or 3 sites, and sites can be classrooms or sites can be schools if it's like an after school program, but I think it becomes unwieldy. And what we've seen with a lot of our partners is that because of the Great Resignation, there's just been so much turnover in school systems and in after school programs that it's been challenging to, build momentum in some of these places. So I would say, Lisa, if your heart is set on a bigger number than 2 or 3 sites, that I would encourage you to start thinking of how you're going to staff this organization. One of our community partners who wasn't here today is an after school program in Queens. And the sort of executive director, Stacy, said, you know what I wish I would have known? I wish I would have hired a full-time person before this whole thing started, right? Like, I don't think she fully appreciated how much of her job was going to be around coordination. And she said it wasn't going to have to be a high-level hire, but goodness, wouldn't it have been helpful to get some, early professional in a sort of organizing project management job, just so that there was somebody sort of from the operations side, keeping everything on the tracks. And so I think if you want to serve different sites, you should think of who is that person, how many hours a week can they contribute. There is part of the grant where of the 75,000, you can earmark a percentage, and I think it's up to 25,000 that is non-outschool classes. So that can come in the form of stipends for your volunteers. It can come in the form of headphones if you have the devices but not the headphones. So there is some cash assistance that you can use creatively that isn't necessarily in the currency of outschool classes. So as you think about what are the people power that you're going to need, I would encourage you to write that in as you consider applying for the grant.
And I would just add, we're also, I think, flexible to work as quickly as prospective applicants want to. And so but also allowing for plenty of planning time so that when things go live, that things go well. And so I think it was one of our early lessons learned that, let's not rush into getting this up and running. Let's make sure that, to your point, the capacity is on the ground and we're providing the appropriate supports in order to make it go well. I think the other lesson learned for me is, especially if you're a community organization or school district where you have direct management over students, is how do you make sure you continue to engage with parents? Because ultimately they're going to understand the needs of their students the best. And if we and you can communicate the value of platforms like OutSchool to them, then they're going to be demanding these types of services moving forward versus being a passive recipient of these services. Jasmine, Michael, anything to add? You don't have to jump in, but just thought I'd just give you an opening.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Jody asked, how do international organizations form partnerships? So we are building out, OutSchool in general has, Morgan, how many countries do we work in now and how many languages? Do you know the specifics?
It's hundreds of countries, I would say. That it has gone international. We don't recruit teachers from hundreds of countries, but we serve students in hundreds of countries.
And so we are forming partnerships with international organizations kind of as they come in. But for this particular grant opportunity, it is only for US-based organizations and schools. Does the organization need to be an established one? Can a new organization apply for a grant? Yes, a new organization can apply for a grant. I think I don't have specifics there. I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. But if you have questions, please reach out to us directly. Let's see. Any other questions? Alicia, you need to an established school in order to apply for a grant, even though you provide educational. You don't have to be an established school. You can be a loose organization. We've also, so there's a requirement that for schools, school districts, and nonprofit organizations that you serve at least 100 students minimum through this grant. And for homeschooling networks, you serve at least 25 students for this grant. But we understand that, not all homeschooling networks and nonprofits serve kind of those thresholds. And so we're encouraging, smaller networks to kind of join together and we'll look for ways to connect you all through this application process to see if you might be able to aggregate the request into one specific proposal. And so that's definitely a possibility. And so you don't have to fully be established, and you don't have to by yourself meet the minimum number of students. When is the deadline? And the deadline is December 17th. And there was a link in the chat that goes to the landing page for the grant opportunity. There's a link to the directions that provides details around the requirements for the grant and how to apply. And then there's a link for you to actually apply. Imani, your question, definitely, you're a STEM nonprofit designing a platform to increase student involvement. Yeah, we would definitely love to learn more about what you're thinking. And so if you think, as you look through the application and see if it makes sense for you to apply. Otherwise, reach out to us directly in terms of looking for other ways that you might want to partner. So I think that is all the questions. I'm gonna revert back to my teacher days and allow for a little bit of wait time. So I hope you all are comfortable with a little bit of silence as we wait for any final questions to come in before we wrap up.
Hi, I'll just make sure everybody knows that both Key and Morgan have shared their contact information in the chat. So they're being very generous with that. So please take note of that and feel free to contact them. And then also we just posted our poll. This is a quick sort of evaluation survey, hearing from you about your feedback on today's session. We really take these to heart, and we really use your feedback to make sure that we're still meeting your needs with these GLR Learning Tuesdays. And I do think I just wanted to check with Morgan and Key, because I know there was a couple slides that you didn't get to. Do you feel like you covered everything? Because I feel there was a lot of questions about exactly how you connect with OutSchool and how you access the resources. I feel like you did cover that, but I just wanted to check to see if we want to pull your slides back up, or are you good?
I think we were good, Morgan.
Okay. So let's see, I guess we really have answered all the questions. Well, I expect we're gonna start having people drop off. So then I'm gonna go ahead and say, Key, I should defer to you, because you were using your teacher patience, which I guess I don't have that patience. but I'm also aware that we're losing people, so we can go ahead and wrap up. If there's any last comments from anybody, because this has been such a rich conversation, and really appreciate the sort of background and understanding what OutSchool is, and then having Jasmine and Michael really kind of dig in and say how you helped make it work for both your organizations and for community organizations kind of writ large. So I want to say a huge thank you to Morgan and Key, Jasmine and Michael, and then we also have Ipek, who's behind the scenes, wasn't on camera with us today, but she's also with OutSchool.org and helped tremendously in this session. So thank you, everybody, and we do encourage you. I know we have our last slide with our upcoming session, so we encourage you to please join us for future sessions. We mentioned what's coming up at the beginning of this webinar, and we really hope that you'll join us next week to just kind of watch a reprise of the trauma-informed practices session, and then later in November, focused on our partnership with BASOS, What Matters, COVID-19's Lessons for American Education, and then early December, Inspiring Young Minds Through Out-of-School STEM. So hopefully you will join us, and thank you again to everybody who was here, and to our amazing speakers for this very rich conversation, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.